morning, everyone. Hey, I hope you had a great Christmas and also you're going to have a happy New Year's. Just 2 more days and then it's the new year, 2025. And if you're listening to this later on, then welcome to your new year. So if you're listening to this next year, because we're probably going to be using the same audio a few times over in the next following years, and then we'll update them as we go. But here's the big thing. This year is, absolutely amazing. So many things have happened. I hope you're excited for the next year. A lot of things are going to be changing. A lot of things are going to be the same. But it's the new year. And that all comes back to the only real change that you have control over is you and what you're going to do. So people like to say they start New Year's resolutions. And then like 2 weeks later, they're done. Find something that you can actually change and actually make solid in your life. You have to, according to science or the experts, they say that you have to repeat something between 20 times and 42 times. So depending on somewhere between that. So within 42 days, you can make something a normal routine that you wouldn't have before. And there is a reason why I'm bringing this up. So welcome to the Adventure Box Podcast. It's so exciting to have you here. Today, we're going to be finishing up the French and Indian War. Now, how would New Year's and the French and Indian War coincide? What is the linchpin, the thing that brings them together? The New Year, a time of change, a time of reflection, and the end of the French Indian War, a time of change. That's right, the French are out, war is done, and a time of reflection. Reflection on all the things that you learned through war and through the outside times. So not talking about the war, but all the other things that were happening around you and the things that were happening before the war. So New Year's has everything to do with the end of any war or any change happening inside you as a person. This is why I bring this up. So right now is the new year, or right now it's just about to turn the new year. Right now, all my kids are home, and I have 6 kids. 5 of them are at home. One of them is actually with their mom, and the other 5 are here. And so we're having a joyous and somewhat rambunctious morning. So you may be hearing some clanks and other things, maybe even someone coming into this room not respecting the rules when it comes to me broadcasting. So here's the thing that I'm going to tell you, the secret to making lasting change. Okay, you want that? Do you really, 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 really want that? Or you're like, whatever. Well, if you say whatever, it's not going to help. But if you're actually open to change, here's the way to do it. And this is the way it works for me. It's not going to work for everyone else. It's not a proven guaranteed for everyone. But this did work for me, and has worked for me multiple times, and is continuing to work for me. What do? 1, you write down your goal. Tell me what your goal is. Or think about what your goal is. You don't have to tell me. Think about what your goal is. Say it over and over again. Then write it down. Place it where somebody you can actually see it. Put it on the back side of your door. Every time you leave your room, you're going to see that. Every time you close the door, when you come into your room and you close the door, you're going to see it on your door. Every time you open the door, you're going to see it on your door. Writing down a goal is great, but it only takes you so far. Another thing to do is to create a routine. Most routines start with a schedule. You actually have to set up a schedule, and then you're able to make those lasting changes. So now going back to history, one more little side note. My son last night was asking me, why do we have to learn about history? It's just boring dead people. Oh, ow. Yes, it is. But that's my livelihood. That's what I enjoy doing. So I had a great ability to talk to him last night about it. Now I had 2 sons going to bed at the same time, and they're sharing a room. While we're talking to them, one of them was like, I'm just going to sleep right now. Like, come on, just because I actually responding to what you asked me. And my other son's like, I'm actually interested in this, so I was like, keep going. And so I was telling them, the reason why we learn about history is because we repeat so many things. As I said, a change. New Year's. It's basically a repeat of after every single war. So Every war that we fight, there is a change at the end of it where we actually try to do better than we were in the past, formerly. And let's see. Sorry, we just had a little bit of technical difficulties. Okay, so as I was saying, the change that you are going to go through is just like they did back in every single war. So why do we learn about all the different wars? Because we don't want to repeat them. And at the end, we are there to reflect on what we learned from the past. History is the same thing. We learn from history so we don't repeat the past. And people are like, nobody experiences social media in the 1800s. Nobody experienced AI and technology. It's like, oh, wait. We didn't? Okay, let me share something with you. What happened near the end of the French-Indian War? You know what? Let's go a little bit further. What happened in the end of the War of 1812? They're like, I don't know. What was the War of 1812? Okay, let me explain to you a little bit what the War of 1812 was. It's when the British didn't take the United States seriously and were what's called impressing. Impressment was where they took a sailor from an American ship that they basically boarded for any reason, and they took that sailor and made him a sailor in the British Army. Like, how could that happen? How could you do that? How could they let that happen? Well, let that happen. They were under duress. If the British were boarding an American ship, it's because they had basically taken it over. And then they justified it because all the people in the United States, or a lot of them, were from Europe. Those that were English in their mindset, the British mindset at the time, they said, hey, they're a British citizen being born in Great Britain. They are now a sailor for us. We're impressing on them the duty to serve the crown. And the person's like, I don't want to serve the crown. I'm an American. Well, too bad, because the British said, you're still doing it. So at the end of the War of 1812, you say that we weren't experiencing AI, or we weren't experiencing social media, or even crypto. Okay, end of War of 1812. What were they experiencing? The Industrial Revolution. Okay, Industrial Revolution. Very different than AI. No, actually it wasn't. Now, the technology was different, but the things that they went through were the exact same. All of a sudden, you had technology, factories that were more effective than hiring out 100 different workers. So what happened? You laid off a ton of workers. What happens when you have AI? Oh, I don't have to hire so many people because I can use AI to do a lot of the processing. Boom, gone. Layoffs. People are let go because they don't need them. Whoa, okay. So there is some correlation between, yes, there's always correlation between parts of history and current day. Now, they might not be the exact same, but the lessons are always the same. Now, the Industrial Revolution happened. Are people still working today? Yes, they are. When AI is here, the people are saying, oh, we're going to get rid of everyone from lawyers to journalists to name it, marketers and such. Yeah, well, even if we are, there will always be jobs that were put in their place. So you can't say that AI is going to take over every job, because there's people that have to manage the AI. There's people that have to increase the production of technology, all these different things because of technology, the new advancements in technology. Same thing with the Industrial Revolution. Okay, now, side note, that took us way off the beaten path. But again, new year, end of a war. Let's talk about the end of the war. What happened? So, to end the war, basically Montreal and Quebec were the two cities up in Canada that had to fall in order to have the French basically end their time in Canada. Okay, and sorry, in North America, basically. But there was also a few other places, such as New Orleans. New Orleans was French. How did the French get away from giving that to the British? Well, they had a loophole. They said to the Spanish, a little underhandedly, under everything else, not telling the British about this, they said to the Spanish, hey, we will sell you this. We will give you this land because we don't want the British to have it. So they signed a treaty under secrecy. So they didn't tell anyone that they were doing this. And then all of a sudden the Spanish owned New Orleans. And that put a lot of headaches for French because they needed the Mississippi River to float down with their furs. And of course the Spanish were going to tax anything that came down from that area. So there's a lot of issues that come with that. But at least to the French, the British, who were their sworn enemies because they just took over Quebec and Montreal and all these other places during the French and Indian War, they wanted to give it to someone else, so they give it to the Spanish. What else happened? Okay, so the British wanted to take over more of French land. Well, not just the French. Hey, we're in this area. We know that Spain is very friendly with France, so let's take over one of their areas. So they attacked where? Cuba. Havana, Cuba. So they came down, floated down the east coast, past Florida, and hit Cuba. So the British landed east of Havana and laid siege on the city June 7th, 1762. Now remember, Montreal and Quebec fell in 1760, 1761. So this is 2 years later. Oh, sorry, this is 1 year later, where they come down into Montreal and try to take it over. So at this point, it takes them about a few weeks, and after weeks of heavy fighting, the British capture the strategic Morro Castle, which is also called the Castillo de Morro, which guarded Havana Harbor. So when you go to the United States on the East Coast and the West Coast, you're going to see a lot of forts. These are large fortresses that basically keep our harbor safe. If there's a harbor that came into the United States, whether the East Coast or the West Coast, it usually had some sort of fortress just near the entrance of the harbor. And that was able to take out ships as they were trying to come in to the harbor. So now that they were able to take over the harbor, Havana officially surrendered to the British August 13th of 1762. So this is it's just over 2 months later. So it was 67 days of a siege. And the surrounding territories basically fell to the British, and so the Spanish gave it back. Okay, so I wanted to give you this understanding because of what happens the next year. Now, what happens when a war ends? A war ends, you make certain arrangements. You create what's called a treaty. A treaty is an agreement between one country and another, or maybe even two countries and another. This basically says, we're going to do X, Y, or Z if you do A, B, and C. Okay, so you both have agreements on both sides. You both have to do certain things. So, the Treaty of Paris, again, Quebec fell in 1760. 3 years later is when they finally officially ended the 7 Years' War over in Europe and the French and Indian War in North America, and basically said, we're done. So at this point when they're done, they have to reconcile. They have to make some sort of agreement between them. Here are a few things that were reconciled in this agreement. First, France had to cede or give over Canada and all territories east of the Mississippi River to the British. So the Mississippi River east was now owned by the British. The treaty also said that Spain had to give the British Florida. So Florida then became British. But in exchange, because the Spanish, they wanted Havana. They wanted Cuba. It was one of their biggest profit makers. So they wanted Havana. So the British said, well, we have everything east of the Mississippi except for Florida. So talking to Spain, we'll take Florida and we'll give you back Havana. You can have Havana back. We know it'd be great, but we want a complete set. So the British, in their mind, basically owned all of North America. Now, this is east of the Mississippi. Everything west of it was, depending on who you talk to, owned by different people. There was the Spanish, there was the natives, there were the French, I said the Spanish. Everybody basically thought that they owned that part. The British even had some idea that they would have owned that, even though they were writing this treaty for east of the Mississippi. The rest was easy to take. So, because no one actually had infrastructure there. All the infrastructure was on the East Coast because it was easy access coming back from Europe. So all these things being said, these are some of the great things. So you can actually see it in the curriculum, all the different parts, all the things that were happening during the Battle of Havana. See certain figures that were in here. Now, these are great. The best way for you to learn history is to actually learn it through the eyes of some of these people. So getting to know these people that were actually in the battles is extremely important. But here's another thing I have in this curriculum. And again, you've been reading the curriculum, you know this. But I basically have life lessons. So the first thing is the importance of patience and long-term strategy. Now here's the thing. Taking over a large section of land, such as Florida, with many different forts, Spanish forts, all throughout, would be a very difficult thing for the British to do. But if they could take out one location, Havana, one city, Havana, take that over, the Spanish want Havana. The Spanish love Havana because it's such a moneymaker. So they would literally give up all of Florida. This is the strategy of it. All of Florida would go for that one island, Cuba, and that one city, Havana, which is basically the one that controls all that area. So long-term thinking. How about adaptability? Leadership. I got a lot of things on leadership in this curriculum, and actually all of my curriculum, because leadership is something that I want to be able to teach all of you, because you are the future leaders of tomorrow. Sacrifice and for the greater good. So there's all these different life lessons you can learn from here. I'm not going to go through them all, but high stakes decision making. Now this is a big thing, especially in war. There's all these high stakes. I'm going to give you another example. I was playing a card game with my wife and my mother, who's visiting for Christmas. So we get into this game. It's called, well, I'm going to say which one. It could be 5 Crowns. It could be Rummy. The 2 different games that we're playing a lot of this weekend, or this week. So in this, we'll say Rummy. My mom never knew Rummy. We taught her Rummy. Now she's addicted to it. Okay, so Rummy. So we're playing Rummy, and everything that you do has to be strategically done. Every card you lay down, because there's a stack of cards in the middle. Every time you discard a card, you place it in the middle where anybody can grab all those cards. So I came up with a new strategy. It's like, hey, wait a second. I'm going to take a lot of risk doing this, so I might lose a few times. But the hope is that I'll make it big. I want to get that middle pile as fast as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay cards in there that I need to pick up and I can use right away in order to get everything that's laid after I put that card down. Here's the problem. If somebody, as we're going around, I place it on my turn, I discard it on my turn, thinking I'm going to pick it up when it comes back to my turn again, but my wife had the chance to pick up the whole pile, or my mom had the chance to pick up the whole pile. And this strategy lost me 2 whole games after like many rounds till we get to 500 points. So 2 times of playing the entire game because I was doing too much risk. So this is a high stakes decision making in a very low risk standard. I mean, it's a game. But in war, it's the same thing. I'm going to give up this strategic position in order to win the battle. Now, the sad thing is you hope you never have to do this, but I'm pretty sure there's like a good amount of conquerors and military leaders that have said, I will give up these troops. They will probably die in order for me to win this war, and their sacrifice will be for the greater good, which will be basically their pride. But in the end, they win, but in the end, they lost a whole bunch of lives because they wanted to win the war. So there's strategic decision making. How do you save the lives and still win the war? That would probably be the way that we would try to solve things. Okay, you have the same vocabulary, you have the same engagements, engaging activities, but now we're going to go into the actual treaty. Now, the treaty itself takes a long time. It takes 3 years of diplomatic discussions. Actually, it takes 2 full years. It's 1762 and 1763 is when they started doing the treaty, negotiating the treaty. And this was a lot of back and forth because it wasn't just 2 countries, it was 3 countries. And they couldn't meet all at the same place at the same time, especially not in any of the war-drawn areas. So they had to find neutral land, neutral ground that they could make this agreement. So they negotiated on and on. Now, after months of negotiations, the Treaty of Paris was signed February 10th, 1763. We already went over the impacts that it had and who gave back what. In here, you can get a full listing of everything that was lost and given back, all the different forts that were lost and given back, and such. So go through all this. You'll see a lot of great things. But what it also does, it wasn't just in the United States. This is everywhere. Now, I want to give you some examples of this. So the British demands, before signing the Treaty of Paris, they wanted to secure North America, which we already talked about. The next thing they wanted to do is they wanted to secure certain parts of the Caribbean, Guadeloupe and Martinique. Other ones is Saint Vincent, Tobago. Remember we talked about this, I think, last week. Grenada. So there's all these different lands that the British wanted. India. What did they do in India? They wanted the French territories in India. They wanted them all. They didn't care. They wanted them all. So the French were going to lose a lot when it comes to India. But again, they lost the war. So, and now these were not all given to them, but there was a compromise between it. These are the actual things that they fought for, not the things that they ultimately received. And you'll see what they fought for and what they actually received. Now, here's another one that's very big for the French. They limited the French naval power because the French were such a naval power. And when did that naval power come back? Not until the Napoleonic Wars. Well, okay, sorry, no. A good amount came in during the American Revolution when they were helping out the Americans. But it really started to peak up again towards the levels of the 7 Years' War during the Napoleonic War. So it took them that long to get there. There's a lot of other things. And there's a lot of agreements on the French side as well. They wanted to retain their Caribbean islands. They were also fighting over us, the same ones. St. Lucia. I have a place in my heart for St. Lucia. I tried to do a humanitarian project down there, though I was outbidded. It was through USAID, but also preserving the rights of fishermen in Newfoundland. Really? Fishermen? Yeah, that was part of their treaty that they were fighting for. They wanted to retain some of the presence in India. And so all these different places, they were able to negotiate, which is why it took a year and a half, 2 years, to actually come up with an actual treaty. And we're able to sign it in February 10th of 1763. So that is a great thing when they were able to sign that. Now, the French and Indian War technically ended when Quebec fell, September 1759. 1756 is when Montreal fell. 1760 is when Montreal fell. And so those were basically the ends of the war, except the treaty, again, took 2 to 3 years to actually develop and sign. But what was going on also during this point? Now, we have 1759, Quebec fell, 1760, Montreal fell. But what about the other locations? May 7th, 1763. Wait. Didn't they sign the treaty February 10th, 1763? Yes, they did. But what still happened? The siege of Fort Detroit began. This is Pontiac and his warriors attempted to surprise attack Fort Detroit. So this is actually the Native Americans at the end of the Pontiac War. So, oh no, sorry, the beginning of the Pontiac War. This is where the indigenous leaders, including Pontiac, basically wanted to resist the British rule in the Great Lakes area at the end of the French and Indian War. So this was not per se the French doing this. This was the Native Americans. And so they laid siege on Fort Detroit, trying to take it over. 1763. 5 months later, about. So Pontiac and his warriors come and attack Detroit and strive to take it over. Well, they weren't successful about it. The siege ended because the British actually, their supplies ran out. They didn't have the reinforcements. So Pontiac lifted the siege and they made a treaty. Now, there was heavy losses on the British side. There was a good sized loss on the on Pontiac's side. And you might say, well, this is great. The Native Americans were actually able to fight the British off. Well, they made a treaty. This is when the Crown basically decided that they were going to secure the land for the Native Americans and stop the settlers, the American colonists. American as in the sense not the country, but of the continent, the American settlers who were on the East Coast in the British colonies. They tried to come over and take over that land from the Native Americans. So there's a big fight about to start. And by 1763, Pontiac's rebellion officially ended. It took them 3 additional years before the rebellion ended. And that was actually because the British were getting stronger and the what was happening around 1766? You're actually going to find that out in the next month's chapters when we talk about the American Revolution. So, yeah, this is great. There's so many things that are happening during this time. But just to know, because the British won the French and Indian War, the Algonquin, who were actually with the British or were the French, they started to be picked on by the Iroquois. The Iroquois were the ones that were actually siding with the British. And so they came in and started to take over land from the Algonquin people. So it wasn't just the British and the French fighting over land. Again, we've already talked about this before. The Native Americans were fighting over land way before the Europeans came. And because of them teaming up, they thought, hey, these people have guns. They're going to help me against, this is why the the Algonquin sided with the French. The French arrived early. They sided with the French. The French actually helped them against the Iroquois. The Iroquois felt jeopardized in that sense, even though they were the more powerful tribe. They didn't have guns and everything, the support from the French. So they went with the British. So this is why there's so much intrigue into this. So what happened? I'm gonna let you do a lot of the research. Now, this last few sections of the book are quite big. I mean, there's a lot of information here. So the shaping of the future empires, all these different things. It's really, to me at least, it's a really cool book to be able to go through, to see all the people that were part of this, to see all the vocabulary, see all the activities you can do. Okay, so that's not as, yay, vocabulary, yay, life lessons. But here's the great thing, is that's a small portion of it. The stories that you have in here are huge. Now, one thing I do want you to focus on is on page 308. It's the impact on the Native American tribes after the Treaty of Paris. We just talked about Pontiac, but there's a lot of other things that were happening. The Cherokee were down near Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas, the Fox and Sioux tribes. We were talking about the Iroquois, the Shawnee and Lenape down in Delaware. Now, these were people that actually lived among the colonists, but in the end are going to be moved out. Huron and Wyandot. So there's a lot of different parts of this. This is probably the best way of ending the French and Indian War, because we're going to end with the Native American perspective. and all the things that they went through. Okay, so now, let's see. I'm going to end it here because one, we're out of time, but two, I want you to read through your curriculum, see what you actually have in there. There's so much more for you, but prepare for, because of New Year's, we're not going to be doing a Wednesday or Thursday episode, just like we did with Christmas. Wednesday and Thursday, take a break off, have a great time, and we'll join you next week as we go into the American Revolution. I hope you have a great time. This is the end of the French and Indian War. We're done. If you have questions about it, please send them to me. I'd love to answer them. I can't answer them unless you give me questions, and I'm lacking in questions. So I challenge you to give me a question. Let me hear it. I want to hear it. And we will talk to you next time. Take care, everyone. Have a great day. Bye. If you have any comments or questions, add them to the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow, actually. Take care. Bye.